Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff Mom Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And it is time for another happy hour. Or maybe like a decently okay hour. It's not an unhappy hour.
Okay.
I think it would be kind of funny.
The title would say otherwise.
The title would. And actually, I don't know that I'm going to name this, but the original title was You're a Coward, Anney.
I did not write this. I had nothing to do with this. This is all Anney.
Yes, this is all mine. But I do think I'll be interested if you have similar thoughts about this. And actually, this is related to previous happy hours we've done, and Monday Mini, I think. One on superstition, women in superstition. And another is just my recent happy hour I did about like a grief check-in on sad murder dads, of course. Because I kind of have an update that is a tie of both of those, if that gives you any hints of what we're going to talk about. But before we get into that, Samantha, what are you sipping on?
I have decided I am going to do both the upper and the downer with a coffee liquor drink. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had my coffee from this morning and I made that with some off-brand Baileys. Thank you, Costco. Not a sponsor.
Neither. Nope.
And then I added some caramel to it. So it's like a boozy caramel macchiato-ish type of drink.
Ooh,
and I added some whipped cream and a
nice.
little bit of caramel syrup on tops. Yeah, I'm being fancy, y'all.
Fancy.
With my straw. Mm-hmm.
A straw? Whoa.
I know. Don't judge me.
I will not.
It's
Never.
metal. Reusable. I would know.
I like how you're already like preparing for the attacks.
I know. Just in case. It has a little silicone top so it won't hurt my teeth.
I think that is important. Yes, and as always, drink responsibly. And yeah, to clarify, we are not currently sponsored by anything we're mentioning. We do have dynamic sponsors, which means that could change at a future date. But currently not sponsored by people we're mentioning.
We're not aware of that right now.
No, that would be a new thing. I'm drinking kind of a fancy spiked lemonade, I guess, because my good friend Marissa, who has been on the show, I've mentioned a lot. Actually, this is kind of related. She and another friend of mine stayed with me on the anniversary of my dad's death, and we got pho. And I always drink a shot of vodka on that day because it's the last thing we ever talked about. Surprisingly, he wasn't a big drinker. Actually, he drank Lambrusco, so I think that's what I'm going to do for his birthday. Even though I don't really like Lambrusco, but I'll do it. But she stayed with me that day. She went to the liquor store to get this stuff, and she came back with an assortment of things that was kind of comical. But one of them was a very nice sparkling lemonade, non-alcoholic. So all I did was took some of that, mixed it with some gin, put some ice in there. So that's it. But it's very refreshing on this quite hot day in my studio recording area. Which, by the way, you and I, as we've mentioned, I've been talking a lot about seeing depictions of podcasters and media. I know I texted you, but we need to talk about bodies after this and the podcaster in it. Okay. I actually do have an episode and a mini planned on the kind of current wave of elevated horror and Me Too in horror. So that's coming up. So look forward to that.
Elevated horror. We've talked about that a lot.
We have, and we've talked about some on, not at all surprising. We've talked about some on here, but I've just noticed kind of a theme. I have watched quite a few horror movies lately, and I know everyone's like, you always watch a lot of horror movies. It's been more, it's been a lot even for me, everybody.
Like I'll send her a TikTok about a horror movie. She's like, I watched it. Like,
I watched it that night, I think. I was like, yes, okay. I was supposed to go on a horror movie break on Monday, and then I didn't. But maybe today is Tuesday, so we'll try again. Brief content warning, some mentions of grief, but pretty light in this one. I think it'll be kind of a comical thing, but you never know with us. So yes, I had this anniversary of my dad's death, and my friend Marissa was there, Katie was there, and I had that letter I'd mentioned in the previous one that I'd unopened. And this is where the "You're a Coward, Anney" comes from. Because I just feel like a lot of our relationship was determined by me being too afraid to face my emotions for reasons I think are justified. But ultimately being afraid. And Marissa opened it and read it, and it was fine. But I did kind of go on a bit of a rant. I talked some trash, Samantha. I talked some trash about my dad. And that night, I felt very guilty, and it was hard to sleep. And eventually I fell into it felt very feverish sleep. And when I woke up, my face was so swollen I couldn't open my eyes. And I had been bitten by either an ant or a spider. And I kid you not, the first thing I thought was, this is payback. This is some universe payback. My dad was mad at me that I said those things. And he cursed some ant or spider. He possessed a spider to bite me in the face in my sleep.
Completely rational.
Right? But I've just noticed, I'm not somebody, I know we talked about this in our superstition one. I really don't believe in that stuff. I don't. But at the same time, I do watch a lot of horror movies, and I'm also just why mess with it, right? Why mess with it? And I have noticed that a lot of guilt I'll feel, even if I remember when my dad died, I kept being we're going to remember him as he was and not a sanitized memory. And now if I say anything negative, I'm oh, a spider is going to attack me in my sleep. And then I happened to break 2 toes separately on the same foot. And I just kept thinking, this is it. He's still mad. He's still mad about what I said. And I think, I don't know. I just noticed a lot of my thoughts around it. Even if I don't believe, I was raised to be religious and spiritual. So I'll catch myself thinking oh, he'd be so ashamed of what I'm doing right now. Oh, he'd think you've done nothing with your life. The episode we did about college student debt. He was a college professor. So I had to go back and re-record a thing to be my dad was a professor. It's just always there. And the worst time sometimes too, this guilt, I tell you. Which I think, I think it makes sense. Because humans try to find this is very indicative of who I am as a person. We always try to find patterns where there might not be patterns because it can protect us in the future. So I don't know. I guess now I'll just be worried about ants anytime I'd say something negative about my dad. And so much of my life has been about keeping him happy and making sure he didn't leave. And I guess that's not, there's a part of me that thought that would just go away because now he's gone. So why do I still feel this way? But it was also a lot of my life, and especially a lot of my relationship with him. And I was talking about that with my friends and how I just feel I can't let it go even now, and how I'll still question oh, is he embarrassed by this, or is he proud of this, as if he's still alive. It's kind of strange. It makes sense. It totally makes sense. But it's also silly. When I was I told you and Eves, because you saw me the day after that ant spider bite. And I was I think my dad possessed a spider and bit me on the face.
Yeah.
Yeah. If that's what the afterlife is, it's just possessing insects to wreak havoc, minor havoc. It wasn't minor in the moment, I'll tell you that, but
right.
It passed. And I do miss him. And I really have felt I've missed him lately, and I loved him. That's something that I think a lot of women feel we have to do, but people in general, you have to give the qualifier. You can't just say something negative. There has to be I love him, I do, but,
Right.
And I didn't do that night. So there it is.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about the fact that what do you do if you feel somewhat relieved about someone's death, and then you feel absolutely horrible and guilt-ridden, especially if it's someone close to you. Same thing is when they're martyred, and you're like, they were not a good person. Just because he died doesn't mean he was a good person or they were a good people. I feel like we need to remember that. We should show, we don't have to be completely disrespectful, but we don't have to pretend otherwise. But it's hard.
Right.
It's definitely hard, especially with people who has love and empathy and trying to show a societal norm or a normal reaction to things. So it's really even harder because saying it out loud feels so foreign for us.
It does. It does. And it's also complicated when you're really close with a person. Like, my dad was a really complex, I mean, everybody's complex, but he was really complex. And we had many great memories together. But I also was, as part of his immediate family, more aware of certain things than like people not as close to him in the family were. So it's strange if they don't know that. You don't want to be like, hi, at the funeral, I've got some bad news for you.
Yeah.
But that makes it so you feel like you can't totally express yourself. And I know we talked about that in the Dutiful Daughter episode. Like, there's a lot of performance that can go into grief for many people. And those kinds of instances like wakes and funerals. It's hard. And honestly, like, I remember mostly just being tired. But that does make it really complicated when you have the kind of decision of like, do I let them live not knowing this? Is it worth telling them this? And in general, in my personal, I don't want to give advice to anybody. I think it's not worth telling them unless something changes.
Right.
Don't think it's worth it. But that does mean it does make it a bit more complicated, especially when these kind of grieving touchstones come up, where people are checking in. And I think that was a part of the thing that made that night harder for me when I was with my friends, is that they knew him too.
Right.
We grew up together. But
they didn't know him. They'll know him.
Right. And so to be like that open about some of that stuff, which I'd never told them, it felt like a betrayal almost, because they were looking at me like, what? I didn't know this.
Right.
I'm making it sound like really bad. It's bad, but it's not anything. It's fine.
But still, like, when you have someone, an ideal of someone, anything not perfect, anything, and again, it's not awful, but it's awful. It's pretty bad. I mean, I'm going to say this as a person on the outside knowing what this is, being like, okay, it wasn't violent, but it was a violation to your entire family and to you. So I'm like, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. People have made movies on this, so.
If I get bitten on the face by an ant tonight, Samantha, it's your fault.
Well, I guess he should be coming after me, but I'm just saying, there are Hallmark movies about this, and then some.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm sorry. But, like, I don't want you to underplay it either, pretending like it's not a big deal and you're just having a natural complaint of, my dad didn't read me bedtime stories. That's not what's happening here. But, like, your anger is, and I don't want to necessarily say righteous, but it's justified. Like, I absolutely justified to the core. And me as a person who holds on to things, I would be even more enraged.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, no, it's just, I guess because we're not the reason we're not talking about it is because obviously I still have a lot of guilt about it, but also because I come from a small town, people listen, so I'm not. But the reason I said that, again, it's not like something super violent or really. I do think, like, my mom and I talked about the anniversary soon after, and we talked about how we felt like we couldn't be totally open with our grief because we're always comparing it to other people's grief, which is something we've also talked about on here. And I think a lot of women especially do. So I guess it's in part that, and also even then I was thinking about the two people I was talking to. I was like, I should be talking about this because they have this issue or they have this problem. They don't need to hear this from me. But also I was I'm really bad at awkward silences. And after the letter had been read, there was quite an awkward silence. So I just everything started going out.
That's funny.
And then eventually it just stopped and they were like, well, I guess we'll leave now.
We're going home now.
Yep,
good luck.
That's good. That's very good. No, it was clear that I think I needed to rest. I needed some rest.
Yeah.
But,
An ointment.
An ointment. Oh gosh. The toe. You should see it, Samantha. It is not pretty.
I can't imagine.
I don't know. I think I guess it was kind of a surprise to me that I still had such of the, thing we talked about in Dutiful Daughter of is he proud? Is he disappointed? Is he watching me read this fan fiction is he mad that I'm saying these things? Which I, as a person who's not really religious or spiritual at all, I was kind of surprised by. But I mean, it makes sense to me. It's hard to just let that stuff go. And memories are everywhere. I often say memories can be like a ghost is haunting you. Because you see that person everywhere. And even in my habits and things that I like, sometimes I'll dream that we're together and we're talking about a thing that I did that day because it was something we would have done or talked about or that he liked. So it makes sense. But I kind of wanted to share because I was just curious. I'm sure a lot of you listeners have had similar experiences where you've broken a toe and thought, even if you don't really believe it, the ghost of this person.
Yeah. For me, it's more immediate karma. That I deserve that and just walk away.
I don't know how much, because I've got 2 broken toes and a pretty serious ant/spider bite. How much more do you think I have to go?
Oh, Lord.
Oh, geez. Well, we'll see.
But your spider bite has cleared.
It has. There's still a little bump. But
I don't see anything.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. Progress?
Yes.
Well, cheers to that.
Cheers, I guess.
Cheers. Yeah.
No?
Sometimes cheers are strange.
Okay.
But we'll do it anyway. And yes, as always, listeners, thank you for joining us in these happy hour segments. If you would like to contact us, we would love to hear from you. Our email is stephanie@momstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter @momstuffpodcast or on Instagram @stuff I've never told you. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina.
Cheers to you too.
Cheers to you too, Christina. And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can listen to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.